Content is most important in public speaking, in sermons, in teaching. That's the first thing you must remember, that content is king. That's the most important thing to get that right. I used to tell students to manuscript their speeches or sermons because you could be precise about exactly what you wanted to say and could time it correctly, and it was an assurance that you had prepared. If you rehearse by reading it through with feeling 2 or 3 times, most people could not tell you are reading, or at least they would praise you for your smooth, enthusiastic, effective delivery. That is indeed the most safe way, and that is what is done with speeches by the President of the United States, for example. They write it out and then they feed it into the teleprompter. One additional step is literally memorizing the speech or sermon word for word like an actor in a play or musical. Then you really can appear impressive. You can pace the stage and deliver your lines flawlessly. But I also always pointed out that in a classroom or a more intimate setting or in a small group or meeting, you likely would not have time to manuscript out exactly a script of what you were going to say if you are a regular teacher or leader. So often you would need to teach from an outline or from bullets or headings on a PowerPoint, etc. Another thing I have seen repeatedly in the literature on public speaking and presentation and educational psychology is that you need to connect with your audience. At the most literal level, this means giving them a chance to have input which you respond to in the moment. For example, we see in Plato's Republic Socrates asking questions to those listening and then asking them further questions. Teaching Socratically, Jesus too often launched into points of content after questions from the crowd. This is one way to make sure you are grounded and not speaking way over their heads. I think it is very effective for a teacher to introduce a topic and then ask what the leaders think about it, and then respond to that. The teaching flows from the listener's current thinking. Then I think it is useful after the teacher has furthered the discussion to invite the listener to respond. This respects the experience and current thinking of the listener, and it also respects the agency and discernment of the listener. They are not being treated as if they know nothing about the topic, and they are not being treated as if they are simply going to submit and succumb to whatever has been proffered by the teacher. There is a healthiness there. Even if someone is going to do a lecture or sermon or speech or monologue with no interaction with the listeners interrupting the speech, in the course of the speech should be crafted in such a way as to take seriously the listener's real current ideas and questions. When we come to this topic, you are likely and rightly thinking. They'll say something like that. That should be accurate so that the listener thinks to themselves, yes, the speaker understands where I am currently on this. In other words, the speaker must have at some point on the ground listened to the typical members of the audience so as to become aware of where they are at. The difficulty with authentic, spontaneous interaction during the teaching is that listeners can act badly, or the teacher can be stumped or not prepared for what is asked, so that chaos feels like it ensues. But this can be mitigated by practices used at press conferences, calling on people one at a time and limiting people to one short question. I started out by saying that content is most important. I then mentioned being in touch with your listeners, whether literally interacting with them as you teach or doing so before the speech so as to accurately address their questions in the uninterrupted speech. My final point is that effective communication is human. Many people feel fear about public speaking, and many more will do it, though they feel mortified watching themselves on video. But the research shows that reading a logical manuscript that you have written can be just as effective for comprehension as better delivered speeches. Interactive teaching or improvised communication with some disfluencies, the or fillers, can also be effective. But often we agonize over our speaking when our content is solid and we know our audience, and we shouldn't. Write it out and read it, or prepare and then deliver it in a more improvisational way. The first way, like an audiobook, could be dry, but probably isn't because it is well written. The second way is similar to the way people talk in normal conversation. So that too works. Many of us have a lot of self-hatred about our ability to speak, but it is just not accurate. We communicate our ideas effectively, whether we read our lectures a bit dryly or communicate more conversationally with some verbal stumbles. So remember, content is key. Know your audience and then communicate it the best way you can, and don't hate yourself for it.